This video will walk you through tutorial 9.2, which will show you how to use properties in C#. We're going to begin by downloading the starting project. When you click and download this in your downloads folder, you're going to see the zip file, cell phones tests extracted as usual, and then open the solutions in it and say OK to this if it asks you. Now what we have in here is a form that we have already created. There it is. Now to make things faster, I have already written the code, and I'm just going to copy paste it, explaining to you how I do things and how the code works. So first thing we're going to do is click project, add class, select class, and the class that we're going to select is going to be named cell phone. We're going to click add to add that class. Now what is going to be this cell phone class? Well, it's going to be this code that you see here, which is I'm going to copy paste so that it's faster, and then I'll explain to you. So first of all, we have three fields or three variables. There's two of them are string, one of them is a number. They're all private, so they cannot be accessed from outside of this class by other classes. So how are these variables going to be seen or changed by the outside world? Well, it's going to be done using these fancy things that C# has called properties, right? So how do properties work? Well, they allow you to change these variables. So it's a way to change your private variables, right? So you have a private variable brand, and for it you're going to name a property called named brand, and for that, in that property, you're going to have a get method which allows you to return the variable brand, and since this is returning a string, that's why we defined this property as a string, because my brand is a string variable. And we also have a way to change the brand to some value that the user is going to provide. Similarly to this, we have our property for model, which allows us to change the model private variable string here, and allows me to see it and allows me to change it. And then also the last thing that I have is a price property. And what is the price property? Well, it allows me to return the price field, which is this private decimal that I have declared up here, and allows me to also change it. So since this is a decimal and it's going to return a decimal, that's why I have to define this property as decimal. So these are properties as they are used in C#. So the only other thing is defining what a phone is going to be as it's created. That's the constructor, the purpose of the constructor. So as soon as we make a new phone, it is going to be with no brand, no name, and no price, or zero price. And then we're going to have some ways to change those original brand, name, and price after creating a phone. So this is all there is as far as the cell phone class is concerned. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the form CS. We're going to double click the create object button, and we're going to write some code here as well. So the first thing that I'm going to do is in the create object button, I'm going to add the following code, which is something that I'm going to explain in a second. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add, in addition to this method that you see here on top of my create object button. Click. So let's have a look at how this works. So as soon as we click the button create object, what's going to happen is this method is going to be triggered. And as soon as that happens, we're going to create a new phone object. As soon as we make a new phone here and use the constructor, now we're going to make a phone nameless phone with no brand, no model, and zero price. And then as soon as we do that, then we call the get phone data and we send over the my phone object as an argument. So we're passing the object as an argument into the get phone data. Now when we do that, the argument is received by this parameter here. So phone is now this phone that we're sending. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the brand of the phone, the model of the phone, and the price of the phone using its properties that we defined earlier, right? So we're using the properties to change the fields of my phone object, right? So we're making the phone object's properties equal to these three different text boxes. Okay, and on the last text box, since it's a number, we have to attempt to read it and make sure it really is a number before we make our property equal to that number. And if it is not a real legit number, then we're going to show a little error message and we're going to make the user go back and re-enter it. So that's the purpose of the get phone data method. And then the next thing that we do is that I need to point out here is that notice that here we create a blank phone, then we're sending that blank phone into this method, and then we're changing that blank phone to some values and some text. Now keep in mind that this actually changing the phone object inside of this method changes the original object here. The reason for that is because we're passing object by reference, right? We're passing a reference to the original object because objects can be very big and they can be cumbersome to move around memory. That's why it pays not to move the whole object, but just to have a reference to the original one. In other words, when you change the phone here in this method, you're also changing the phone that you created from this method here. So then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the properties that we changed in the get phone data method. So all the changes that we made here to this phone, right? Were basically we went in there, we pulled the text from this data, from these text boxes, and we stored it into the object. And the next thing that we're going to do now, and this piece of code here now is to show the properties of the object into these labels, and that is what we're doing in this code here. So we're making the text of each of these labels equal to the properties of the object. So this way you now see how we can use properties, how we can define properties in C#. Now let's run the program, make sure it works, and iPhone, model 8, price 700, create object, and there you go.